Have you ever heard you need to run slow to run fast and been vastly confused about what that means and how that can apply to you? Some people fail to understand is that when it comes to running, pace is important, but oftentimes effort is even more important, and determining the effort you're putting into each workout, using that to determine your training stress, if you're overtraining or undertraining, is a much simpler way to gauge how you're doing. It is true that running slow can help increase your aerobic capabilities, but alongside this, we also need to take into account the other body systems, such as our anaerobic system, and use our heart rate to not only do those low and slow, steady runs, but also those high-intensity, faster runs that are key to developing speed. During each and every training session, it's important to recognize the effort that you're putting into it and the level that you're working at. You don't want to be working too hard too often as you'll burn out, but you also don't want to be working too easy as you simply won't see improvement, and that can be frustrating. When we're using effort and heart rate is almost directly correlated to the effort you're putting out, I like to separate it into 5 distinct training zones. Zone 1 is going to be our easiest zone of heart rate. This is going to be your warm-up, your cool-down. It is easier than conversational. You're not putting any strain on your aerobic system or your legs almost at all. Zone 2 is what you hear a lot about, and this is where you're going to develop your aerobic system and your heart. This is an easy conversational pace. This is where you're going to be doing most of your running because it takes a long time to develop that aerobic base, but this is where a majority of your distance training will come from. Zone 3 is when you start to work on your aerobic threshold. And this Zone 3 training is slightly harder than Zone 2, and this is where you start to increase your ability to run at faster paces more comfortably. Zone 4 is what we like to call the lactate threshold zone, or also where lactic acid starts to build up in your muscles. This is also the point where typically lactic acid can no longer be cleared from your muscles by your body faster than it is building up. Training in this zone helps increase your body's ability to clear the lactic acid and develops that system over time. Zone 5 is our final zone, and this will be maximum effort. This is fast repeats and race pace. This is strictly working your anaerobic and neuromuscular systems. This is training your body and your muscles to run fast and get stronger. Now, when you look at these 5 training zones and you hear things on the internet such as run slower to get faster, it's common to pick one of these training zones, commonly Zone 2, and just lump all of your training in there. Now, that can have its own benefit, but studies have shown that's not going to give you the progress and the improvement that you're looking for, rather than splitting your training up into various zones. For Zone 1, this is again our easiest zone. It's ideal to spend around 30 to 40% of your training here. This includes warm-up, cool-down, and anytime your heart rate is below that Zone 2 aerobic. Now, Zone 2, again, this is where you're going to spend most of your time. This can be anywhere from 40 to 50% of your training, or up to 80% if you're decreasing how long you're spending in Zone 1. You want to spend most of your time here because your aerobic system takes the longest to develop, and simply having time on your feet and time running is what develops this aerobic system and enables your heart to circulate blood more efficiently. Now, Zone 2, we also spend a lot of time here because it is not taxing on your muscles yet. So it's easy to get a lot of volume while not exactly impacting your muscles as much. Zone 3, our threshold zone, this is where we're going to be spending 10 to 15% of our time every week. And this will be a weekly threshold run or threshold pickups within an easy run that you might put into your week to be at that heart rate level. Zone 4, we're getting lower and lower. Heart rate's getting higher, so we're spending 5 to 10% of our time in Zone 4. This will be your weekly interval session or hard repeats that you're doing during the week to improve your lactate clearing ability and your VO2 max. Finally, Zone 5, our highest heart rate, maximum heart rate. This should be no more than 5% of your weekly volume. This is because you don't need much volume here to reap the benefits. This can either be a race, or it can be hard sprinting sessions or hill sprints during the week to really train that neuromuscular system. So we have a good idea of what each heart rate zone is, what the purpose is, and how much time every week we should ideally be spending in these zones. But how do you determine what these zones are, and how do you use your own heart rate data to apply this training principle? The first thing you're going to want is an accurate way to gauge your heart rate. Most modern watches, like a Garmin or a Coros watch, will have a heart rate monitor built in. And while the technology in these has improved over the past years, it's still not as good as something like a heart rate monitor that straps to your chest. I have one of these, and it's a substantial investment, but the heart rate tracking ability is infinitely better, at least in my opinion, and it'll give you the most accurate data so you can optimize your training. So after you have a way to monitor your heart rate, whatever it is, if it's your watch or your chest strap, we want to determine two main values. One is your maximum heart rate, and the other is your resting heart rate. Now, an easy, simple formula that's widely used for maximum heart rate is take 220 minus your age. So for me, I'm 21 years old. My maximum heart rate would be 199. You can also figure this out by doing a maximum heart rate test on a track or a treadmill to get a slightly more accurate value, but whatever works easiest for you. Now, your resting heart rate, you're going to want to wear your watch to sleep and get your heart rate as soon as you wake up. That's when it's going to be at the lowest, and that'll be your resting heart rate. And with these two values, we're going to be using the Carven method, which uses what's called the heart rate reserve. You take your maximum heart rate, subtract your resting heart rate, and that is what's called your heart rate reserve. Once we have our heart rate reserve, it is pretty simple to put it into each zone. So for zone 1, it is 50 to 60% of our heart rate. So we take our heart rate reserve times, to get the lower bound, we take our heart rate reserve times 50%, and then you add back in your resting heart rate. So if I did that, my lowest bound of heart rate for zone 1 would be 152 times 50% plus 47, and that gives me 123. I'll show the calculations on screen, but this can be done moving up through every zone with the same formula. So zone 1 is 50 to 60%, zone 2 is 60 to 70%, zone 3 70 to 80, and so on and so forth, to eventually end up with these values for me. It's not a terribly complex formula, but it's a fairly simple and easy way to get a general guideline for where your heart rate wants to be in each zone. This is just one great way of calculating your heart rate zones. Now, there are plenty of other ways to do this. I think Garmin has something in their app where it calculates it for you based on this data, and there's a myriad of other calculators online. As always, there's variance in every aspect of this. Each person is individual and different, so take these heart rate zones that you calculated with a grain or two of salt, and just use them as a general guideline. If you're around the right area, then you're probably okay. But now that you have these zones, you can start to just notice it in your training. Don't be tied to them, but incorporate it a little bit to make sure you're getting the most out of your training and switching it up to work all of the body systems and not just one.